A threat in the air. There was an attempt to assassinate Zelensky.
The government aircraft was attacked.
Drones pursued the Ukrainian president's plane.
The aircraft successfully touched down safely well in advance of its scheduled arrival, which fortunately allowed it to evade the unmanned aerial vehicles. This incident can be classified as a hybrid attack.
Putin has given up on his cherished dream. There will be no restoration of the USSR.
Integration of what? The Soviet Union? No. No, of course, that's simply out of the question.
An unexpected surprise for Putin. Modi spoke in Ukrainian.
Good afternoon.
Cringe of the week, Indian TV aired a cartoon about the friendship between Modi and Putin. Repetition is the mother of learning. Trump never stops talking about his mission to end the war.
The USA, specifically,
They will abandon Ukraine. Europe doesn't trust them. Trump's negotiators.
Washington might make a deal with Putin without Ukraine and without Europe.
they're playing games with both you and us. We must not leave Ukraine and Volodymyr alone with these guys.
All this and more. We'll talk about it further on the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. This is the topic of the day. Please don't forget to like this episode so more viewers can see us. Well, friends, so Putin continues to embarrass himself around the world. This time he's doing it in India. By the way, an Indian journalist there really put him on the spot by asking an uncomfortable question about Russian-speaking Ukrainians whom he's bombing. And, it seems that the Botoxed one really lost his composure this time, and quite badly at that. The details and specifics of the illegitimate one's visit to Modi are coming up in the report, and afterwards, let's discuss this and other topics.
Problems with the West are forcing him to cling more tightly to old partners. Vladimir Putin recently flew to India, a nation he demonstrably loves only as much as he can personally profit from his engagements with it.
Moscow is begging New Delhi to save the Russian market.
And to make the visit look even more ceremonial, they put on an entire Putin show for him. Hysteria. Upon the Kremlin-dictator's arrival, there was a red carpet. And a so-called cultural program right by the plane. It's interesting, who benefits more from this visit? Is it still Putin or India itself as well?
This is very beneficial for Putin because, first of all, it shows that he is not an outcast. Secondly, it's an attempt to show that they are actively working with those countries that are not the leading ones. Today there's the G7, but instead they work with large economies and think about the future. I think this is the narrative that will be sold to Putin domestically.
But the height of absurdity was yet to come. An Indian TV channel showed a cartoon featuring Putin and the President of India, Modi, driving past oil rigs and singing a song about friendship. Song in a foreign language. But you might wonder, what does oil have to do with it? The answer is very simple. India has reduced its purchases and now Putin will have to beg them to resume.
The issue isn't just about oil, it's about major economic and trade partners for Russia, which need to emerge in the absence of trade relations with, for example, the European Union, which are rapidly declining. Russian oil really does need to go somewhere, and all of this is extremely important for Putin today.
During the visit, it was all about grandeur. Putin managed to keep up appearances right until a local journalist asked him about Russian-speaking Ukrainians from the occupied Ukrainian cities, which completely stumped the Kremlin old man.
But they were also shocked, wondering how Putin could do this to us, his own people. Many of the women I spoke to were shocked. What can you say to the people in eastern Ukraine whose families are actually in Russia, who regularly move back and forth between Russia and Ukraine? What would you say to them?
I didn't understand the question. Shocked by what?
It seems that people in Russia have stopped being squeamish about Indian imports, because one of the reasons for the bunker dwellers' visit was precisely to increase purchases of Indian goods.
Contacts with India are much more preferable than contacts with China, surprising as it may seem. Because firstly, in Russia there is a great fear of Chinese expansion. In the Far East, in general, there is a very negative attitude toward the Chinese. Such deep ties with India will sell much better to the domestic Russian audience than ties with China.
But India, on the other hand, would like to get a couple of fighter jets and air defense systems from Russia. Although it would seem that Russia itself could also use them.
The point is to develop the aviation industry in India, which is striving to acquire the latest combat systems, including fifth-generation aircraft.
Russia, in turn, also promised to ensure uninterrupted fuel supplies. I wonder, does Russia itself have enough?
No need to worry about their own people, their own stay silent, and for now, Putin thinks that his own won't really raise their voices. For some reason, Putin is confident about that today. If I were him, I wouldn't be so sure. But Putin thinks that he can shut his own mouth, but India as a partner is very important today.
But the most remarkable thing about Putin's visit is what is not visible. Propaganda. Russia has agreed to launch an Indian bureau for Russia Today. But why would that be?
This propaganda works very, very well. And in this sense, I think they will stoke anti-American sentiment, they will stoke anti-European sentiment. And I would draw attention to an article by Alexander Stubb that was recently published, where he writes that the main global battleground will unfold precisely in the countries of the global south. In
the context of international isolation and sanctions pressure, Moscow demonstratively emphasizes its closeness with India, calling it almost the most powerful power. Anything at all, as long as they agree. And
we absolutely need to develop our military and military technical cooperation, because India is indeed a powerful and significant state, a crucial center of power and influence in all of Asia. And it is profoundly important for us to meticulously build and maintain close, tight, and genuinely mutually beneficial relations with them.
Also, even before Putin's visit, Russia and India resolved an issue that had been pending for 10 years. Delhi agreed to lease a nuclear submarine from Moscow for $2 billion for 10 years.
It seems to me that the main point here is that we recently witnessed an escalation of the armed conflict between India and Pakistan. And in fact, things were not going too well for India there. I think that the issue of armaments is quite important for India right now. Maybe I don't know who made concessions to whom, but apparently they really need the submarine as well.
No matter how friendly relations with India may seem, sanctions and Russia's isolation are forcing Putin to do everything possible not to lose even such partners.
Political scientist and doctor of political science Petro Oleszczuk is joining our broadcast. Petro, hello, I'm very glad to see you.
Hello?
Let's start with this trip to Delhi. Honestly, it's sad to see that Putin's isolation is breaking down, that the international order is coming apart at the seams. And on the one hand, of course, it feels like a triumph of evil, wouldn't you agree? This old dictator shuffling down the red carpet, warm welcomes, and he's just basking in Modi's compliments, all these cartoons and everything. By the way, there's a separate point here. Hello to Trump. Let's see how he reads into this. But don't you think that the underlying reason for this visit is actually rather sad for the Russian Federation? And can it be called Putin's last hope? So what is he ready to lay at Modi's feet, and what is he hoping for in return?
Well, quite a lot, actually. It's obvious that it's important for Russia to keep the Indian market for Russian oil. That's why they're offering discounts and other incentives, just so India keeps buying their oil. In addition, Russia is ready to make numerous concessions to India on other issues, for example, in matters of military cooperation. The legendary lease of a Russian nuclear submarine. At least until India acquires its own comparable resources. So it's clear that Putin is willing to pay quite generously to maintain relations with India. And this, in principle, is a distinctive feature of Russian diplomacy in recent years. That is, yes, they are kind of breaking through the isolation, but they are doing it at a rather high price. Even though the amount of money they have isn't increasing. That's also a fact. One way or another, before this very oil can be sold, it has to be delivered. And we can see how Ukraine has recently been quite successful in attacking Russian transportation assets in the Black Sea as well. We can recall the special operation by the SSO targeting tankers of the Shadow Fleet. So, well, yes, Putin might probably perceive all this as a moment of personal triumph. Although, to be honest, I don't see anything particularly special here. But in principle, India has always maintained a rather ambiguous position. Modi has visited Moscow before and met with Putin. They traded, and in fact, thanks to Indian money, they to some extent protected Russia. This continues, it's not something new, probably, at least personally, I don't perceive it the same way, for example, as a red carpet in Alaska, since we are still used to seeing the United States in a certain way. If not as an ally, then at least as a close partner of Ukraine, whereas India has never been a Ukrainian partner and probably never will be. We are simply too far apart, too different, our interests are too different, our views on everything happening in the modern world are too different. Yes, well, basically, yes. So, in a way, Putin continues to buy support by any means necessary, and here the question arises, when will the time come to pay for everything he has promised to everyone? From the Americans to the Chinese to the Indians, he's probably already mortgaged everything to all of them. You know, in this sense, Russia reminds me of an over-mortgaged property on which they've already taken out a huge number of different loans. But obviously Putin isn't thinking about that. For Putin, and most importantly, the priority now is to continue the war against Ukraine at any cost. He's obsessed with this war, so he's ready to give away anything, from natural resources to submarines, just to keep the war going, just so they keep giving him money. And in principle, as practice shows, many are willing to accept this deal. Why not? It's beneficial for India. They look at all of this purely from their own propagandistic perspective. Reasons, well, not propagandistic, let's say, but rather for their own pragmatic reasons.
The drinking lieutenant in the old days, you know, who for the sake of, he bet everything, lost his horse 3 times, just the horse. Today, that's the Russian Federation. That's a very accurate allegory you've made. Yes, at the House.
The same old habits, always wanting to win it back and putting everything on the line every time.
So how will Xi Jinping and Donald Trump view this? They've already been offered all this before. And now they're watching his visit to India. And it's unlikely they like it. Everyone there is doing the splits, you know? Both Modi and Putin, it turns out. Putin is doing the splits between China and the United States of America. Modi is doing the splits between Russia and China and the United States of America as well. All of them are threatened by increased sanctions from the United States of America. Let's not forget that India has long been an antagonist of China. So how do you deal with that? Who could they have angered? And wasn't that one of the topics on the agenda at this meeting? Really? To show that we can form other partnerships and not be completely dependent on you.
Probably Putin thinks that once again he'll manage to wriggle out of it, that everyone will end up coming to him, seeking his favor. Naturally, all this groveling that he observes towards him from the United States motivates him. It encourages him to pursue such policies, thinking that in any case they won't go anywhere. Well, even if they don't like it now, there's nowhere for them to go, and tomorrow more envoys will come anyway. Once again, he feeds them a line about how he's ready to be friends, trade, and make peace with everyone. So, in a way, he's trading on this illusory friendship of his. And in this way, he tries to play them off against each other, basically treating them all like fools. Frankly speaking. Well, apparently this still works somehow up to now. That is the fact that Putin hasn't yet faced any destructive consequences as a result of this kind of policy. But perhaps this convinces him that he's doing the right thing, constantly making promises to everyone. And all in all, still, it truly seems to me this is quite a significantly risky game in the very end, because sooner or later the inevitable bills might indeed come due. But he obviously believes that he'll be the first to win, and therefore won't have to pay the price. So that's why there's this rush, these constant declarations that everything will be over tomorrow, that he'll defeat everyone tomorrow, and so on. I think this is happening precisely because of that, because of this logic.
And couldn't this logic have arisen from the understanding that Trump today and the United States along with him are more likely to become allies for the Russian Federation, if before this was only whispered about? Now this level of subservience, as you mentioned, America's subservience to Putin has become completely open. All masks are off. It's reached a new level, and it's both surprising and sobering. The new strategy, the doctrine of the United States of America, which was announced today, it's written there in black and white. It explicitly states the normalization of relations with the Russian Federation. And I also want to remind you that back in 2017, this same President Donald Trump signed a law regarding the annexation of Crimea, which stated that under no circumstances would the United States ever recognize this annexation and that they would help Ukraine in its fight to regain the peninsula. And there were many more kind and useful paragraphs and words written there about Ukrainians.
Well, that's typical for Trump. Today he promises one thing, tomorrow another. So you can't really count on him, just like on American politicians in general. But that's a separate topic. Yes, of course. But on the other hand, there's still the significant factor of China, which has quite recently and rather dramatically increased its considerable influence on Russia, particularly in various key geopolitical and economic areas. For example, when American envoys were visiting, at the same time the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was also in Moscow, which, in my opinion, is quite interesting. The Chinese do not allow the Russians to conduct relevant negotiations with the Americans alone. And it's obvious that China has its own interests here. And if, for example, the Trump administration is doing everything it can to pull Russia over to its side in a hypothetical confrontation with China, China has completely different plans. So this constant attempt, on the one hand, maintaining strategic relations with China, and on the other, flirting with the United States, well, that's a rather risky policy. I've already talked about this, and probably the idea is that we won't have to drag this out for long. In other words, another decisive victory, another blitzkrieg of sorts. And then Putin will be the one dictating the terms, and none of this will matter anymore. But if not, it's obvious that once again Putin has no plan B, since he clearly believes too much in his own supposed greatness. Well, of course, the toothlessness of Western politicians has only encouraged Putin over the years.
For many years. I was just about to ask about that. What if there is such a plan? Plan B, Peter. Does the United States even have one? It seems to me they don't have any plan at all, nor do our European partners. And
no plan at all, yes. Essentially, Plan A is outlined in this very new doctrine. We retreat to the Western Hemisphere, stay there, and basically don't interfere. Everything else is supposedly not our concern. At the same time, we have to understand that the Western Hemisphere is, after all, the smaller part of the Earth, in terms of population, in terms of economic resources, capabilities, and so on. Well, probably that's why all American geopolitical doctrines of the 20th century were based on the necessity of presence, specifically the presence of the United States, not only in the Western Hemisphere. So this is a doctrine of weakness, a doctrine of retreat, a doctrine of withdrawal. And probably, when reading such doctrines, China itself feels a strong desire. Well, if the United States is leaving, then logically, it becomes China's time. And again, there are these fantasies that in this situation, as if they're going to leave the Eastern Hemisphere, but somehow they'll still be friends with Russia. Who is going to let you be friends with Russia?
they're even telling Europe to be good friends with Russia, you see? This is quite something.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So, well, all of this is a bit absurd, but again, that's the reality right now. And probably all these realities are what push Putin to throw himself into all sorts of new adventures even more. That is, this is probably Putin's main trait, his tendency to raise the stakes, to be adventurous, to believe in his own unlimited abilities. It has let him down more than once before. On the other hand, it hasn't yet led to any critical consequences for him, because in the end, everyone still gets scared, backs down, and will continue to think, well, if nothing works out, I have nuclear weapons. In the end, they'll back down anyway. Even if nothing comes of all these maneuvers, nothing really bad will happen to me anyway. But if it works out, if it succeeds, then I'll get everything at once. Then probably this is a significant trait that is truly connected to the undeniable fact that the Western elites have consistently shown themselves to be incredibly and profoundly weak indeed. And weak not only politically, but also, for example, intellectually, morally, and even spiritually, demonstrating a profound and pervasive fragility.
That's true. It's true because many of them are still dependent on Russian gas, on Russian oil, and spend on them. They spend much more on purchasing resources than on supporting Ukraine. So what does all of this current situation we're observing mean for Ukraine? because even President Zelensky and many analysts say that all of this could come to an end as a window of opportunity to end, freeze, or somehow stop this war right now? Or do you think we're entering once again a new phase? That would probably be the sixth one already. A new phase since Donald Trump's presidency. Before. That is, we're going back to square one again, and once more there will be discussions about yet another peace plan. In other words, everything that benefits Putin, dragging things out.
But still, it's interesting to wait and see. The reaction from the United States is still, I think, strange.
To the humiliation. To what? The humiliation of Putin's visit to India or the latest humiliation in Moscow? To all of it.
Talking
about Trump. But Trump has already explained everything to you. Witkoff once again felt that Putin was ready to end the war.
Trump, yes. But still, Trump isn't everything. The United States, and as practice shows, his ratings are falling. And there is every reason to believe that in the upcoming elections, the Republicans will face a defeat. He'll turn into a lame duck, and essentially that will be the end of it for the most part. And the introduction of such documents without the slightest discussion, and is telling that no one discussed this doctrine, and no one even announced it. They simply just went ahead and published it, and that was truly it. And now I'm curious, will there be any reaction from the American elite, civil society, politicians, or congressmen? Congressmen and Republicans must see that their chances of staying in Congress are vanishing before their eyes. So yes, there is, let's say, a certain core of MAGA voters who probably like this, but whether there are enough of them to win the election is highly doubtful. And honestly, I don't understand what Trump can offer in terms of his policies to somehow secure voter support. That's why, in reality, I think Trump's strategy is simple: to take everyone by storm with a swift attack, to present everyone with a fait accompli, in order to prevent the process of discussion from starting. But if he fails to pull it off by storm, and even minimal discussion of what's happening begins within the United States itself, I think that discussion could be very unpleasant for Trump, simply because he decided to completely reconsider and even condemn the entire foreign policy of the US over the past 35 years.
We might as well wait for new tapes from Itkov or someone else. It's possible that this plan and this doctrine were dictated by the Kremlin as a peace plan. Yes, the latest so-called
American one. You know, I want to tell you, yes. Moreover, I compared two texts, the Russian ultimatum of 2021 and Trump's American doctrine, and I found something. There are a lot of points that match up. For example, the theses about not expanding NATO. Well, yes, so they really do take into account.
In some places, the doctrine frankly reeks of the swamps. Russian ones, let's be honest. And you know, that
far Europe concerned, yes. I
share your considered view that the Republicans are highly unlikely to get through the upcoming midterm elections all that successfully. And considering that December 19th is already very close, Trump, I mean the tapes tell me exactly how Lord he completely forgot about this pedophile, Witkova. No, it's Witkov, the one who comes to Putin after shaving. And that one is Epstein. And so when these tapes are published, well, I think there will be another avalanche of scandals connected to Trump. Although, of course, he has covered his bases there, and probably the most terrible information won't be made public. But then Americans will really have to consider whether it's disadvantageous for them to go into the midterm elections without Trump, because under his banner, they've already lost several key states, as we remember from last month. Well, time will tell, but indeed the ground under his feet could really start to shake. But we have our own work to do. We just need to hold out until all of this happens. But now, all our hopes rest on the armed forces of Ukraine and our European partners, who are slowly but surely starting to see things clearly, though not as quickly as we would like. Petro, thank you so much for finding the time. Please join our discussions again. Political scientist and doctor of political science Petro Oleszczuk was my guest today. I am very grateful to you for that. Until next time. We are all
fine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.